All right, you guys. So, Ticket TV live streams, like, share, subscribe. Shouts out to the whole LDBC. Salute to 8 Weapons, C Rep Life Music. And let's get into this video. You know, I had to go back and look at Mark Cuban based off the fact that he been out here capping for Steve Ballhead. I had to go back and look at Mark Cuban very closely. Uh, and, we talked about the situation with Dirk yesterday, taking $195 million less in his career, destroying his potential career earnings of being $200 million more in the public eye and on the official NBA books, just to stay with the Mavs, right? Which is, man, ridiculous. When Texas has no state income tax, that you would give up $195 million that you could have just pocketed right there, which is crazy. But, I mean, to each his own. Now, let's get into this, right? Because I had to go look at Mark Cuban when he stood up for Steve Ballmer so fast. And remember, this is the same Mark Cuban who, in the Donald Sterling situation, the prior owner of the LA Strippers, got eviscerated in the media for comments he made during that situation. And we're going to get to that right now. But first, I want to tell y'all, and I want to talk about some of the background of Mark Cuban, because he's looking real shady in this situation. And that he's the one, because of his big mouth, that now everybody's thinking about the situation with Dirk, who gave up $195 million in pay cuts. Well, it looks like pay cuts to stay with the Mavs, right? But now with this situation going on and Mark Cuban so quick to jump out here for Steve Ballmer, man, this whole thing looks disgusting with these two billionaires right here. Now, Mark Cuban, you guys who don't know, he holds the record for the most fines levied on an NBA owner. This dude has been fined over $1.6 million across at least 13 incidents, primarily for conduct unbecoming an NBA executive. Think about what I'm telling y'all here, right? This dude has criticized referees, right? And statements he's made have been detrimental to the league, and they often arose from his courtside antics, post-game rants, and this guy's media statements and comments that he's made. Now, we can start back in November of the year 2000, where he was fined $5,000 for criticizing an official after a win versus the Clippers, $15,000 for being escorted off the court during a confrontation with an official versus the Jazz, and $25,000 for verbally abusing officials after a loss to the Supersonics, all in the same month, November 2000. Then in January of 2001, he was fined $250,000. That was the largest fine in league history at that time, for criticizing referees after a loss to the Pistons, including staging a replay freeze for photographers. And he also was hit with a $100,000 fine for sitting on the baseline during a road game versus the T-Wolves. Now, in February of 2001, he was fined $10,000 and suspended for 2 games for rushing on the court during a fight with the Cavs, right? Remember the Chalupa incident. Then, in April 2001, he was fined another $100,000 and suspended 1 game for a derogatory choking gesture he made during a loss to the Phoenix Suns. In January 2002, he was fined $500,000, right? He was fined $500,000 for repeated public criticism of officiating after a loss to the Spurs, including comments about the NBA's director of officials. 2005-2006, he was fined $25,000 for rushing on the court and cursing during a playoff game versus the San Antonio Spurs. In May and June of 2006, he was fined $200,000 for complaining on the court and blogging critically about the playoff officiating versus the San Antonio Spurs. And he was also fined $250,000 for misconduct at the Game 5 of the NBA Finals loss to the Miami Heat, including profanity in the media sessions. Now, in January 2009, he was fined $25,000 for yelling at Denver Nuggets player J.R. Smith after an elbow incident. In May of 2010, he was fined $100,000 for comments during a TV interview about recruiting LeBron Ramon James. In January of 2014, he was fined $100,000 for confronting referees and using inappropriate language after a game. In February of 2018, he was fined $600,000 for publicly stating that the Mavs should tank for the rest of the season on a podcast, which was deemed conduct detrimental to the league. An owner talking about tanking in 2018. But it gets worse, y'all. So in March of 2020, he was fined $500,000 for an on-court tirade criticizing officials during a protest of a game versus the Hawks. Now, the last and most significant of Mark Cuban, and this may have been the end of Mark Cuban, is in April of 2023, Mark Cuban was fined $750,000 for arresting key players in the game widely seen as tanking to improve playoff seeding. Now, Cuban pledged to match the fine with a charity donation, right? So those fines basically reflected a pattern of impulsive behavior by Mark Cuban, right? Now, in 2018, Mark Cuban had those sexual misconduct investigation and sanctions that went on. So basically, in September 2018, an independent investigation by the law firm Relman and Alderman, prompted by Sports Illustrated reporting, uncovered 20 years of sexual harassment, domestic abuse, and a toxic workplace culture within the Mavs organization, including assaults by a former team president on reporters and executives ignoring complaints. Now, while Mark Cuban is not accused of personal misconduct, the probe found that he failed to adequately supervise the front office and was aware of some issues without acting decisively. Now, the NBA also fined the Mavs $500,000 and requires sweeping reforms, including mandatory training, a formal misconduct reporting system, quarterly progress reports, and hiring more women for leadership roles. Now, Mark Cuban agreed to donate $10 million personally to the women's leadership and domestic violence organizations to avoid a larger league fine. Now, he issued a public apology calling it a stain on the franchise. Also, you had the Donnie Nelson wrongful lawsuit termination. In March of 2022, the former Mavs GM, Donnie Nelson, sued the team and Mark Cuban for wrongful termination, alleging retaliation for reporting that his nephew was sexually assaulted by a team executive during the 2020 NBA All-Star Weekend in Chicago. Now, Nelson claimed that Mark Cuban offered him $52 million to sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop the claim. Now, while the Mavericks accused Don Nelson of extorting, demanding up to $100 million, the suit highlighted ongoing cultural issues post the 2018 scandal they had going on. Now, the case settled confidentially in late October 2024, just before a scheduled December trial, with Nelson dropping the suit with prejudice, meaning he couldn't bring it back up, so they settled. Both sides confirmed the resolution, and Mark Cuban declined the comment on it. So basically, then you had a whole situation with, and get this, y'all, Donald Sterling. So the Donald Sterling situation was crazy. There was a TMZ video, or audio, I should say, released of Donald Sterling's racist comments to Mrs. V. Steviano, right? Now, Mark Cuban commented at a conference in Tennessee, and he called Sterling's remarks abhorrent and supported the NBA's swift response, including a $2.5 million fine and lifetime ban imposed by Commissioner Adam Silver. However, Mark Cuban was the one that came out and cautioned against a rush to judgment on forcing Donald Sterling to sell the Clippers, warning that banning owners for private statements could set a dangerous precedent for the league and society. Now, he said, I think you got to be very, very careful when you start making blanket statements about what people say and think as opposed to what they do. It's a very, very slippery slope. He acknowledged the repugnance of Sterling's words, but stressed the complexity of punishing private conversations, even ones accidentally recorded. Now, those comments from Mark Cuban got him some heavy backlash, with some people interpreting him as soft-pedaling Sterling's racism. Now, he clarified on Twitter in follow-up interviews that he wasn't defending Sterling's character or views, but was concerned about the broader implications of the NBA policing private speech. He emphasized that Sterling's public actions as an owner, such as documented discrimination in housing tied to his Clippers role, provided ample grounds for punishment, but he remained wary of bans based solely on private comments. Now, Mark Cuban ultimately supported the NBA's decision to force Donald Sterling to sell the Clippers, finalized on 2014 of August, and praised Adam Silver's handling of that situation. Right? And we're gonna see if he praised Adam Silver and however he deals with this situation with Steve Ballhead, because this one's gonna be interesting. Y'all let me know what y'all think about Mark Cuban, man. Like, share, subscribe, man. It gets interesting, bro.
Hey, I really appreciate you guys for supporting the channel, supporting the network. Like, share, and subscribe. Once again, there are links. Get the free membership on our website. That way you guys won't miss any of our news update stories or videos. They're all on the website, ticketvmedia.com. You go over there. You can go right to the members part and become a free member. That way you guys will get all the updates. Also, straight drop weight loss formula. Make sure y'all go tap in and copy some of that, as well as subscribing to our podcast show. Link will be pinned at the top of the chat down there below. And also, we just appreciate all y'all who support the channel. Cash App, PayPal.